Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Weather Center Nazario. It is now November 1st, 2023. October has come and gone. The Halloween season has officially concluded, and we are now on our last 30 days of hurricane season 2023. And it goes without saying, as we roll into the full-fledged holiday season, guys, I want to start off the month of November by saying I'm very grateful and very thankful for every single one of you who have shown this channel so much gratuitous support since we started up early August with the coverage of Hurricane Idalia. It goes without saying, as we go through the month of November and eventually December and we get into Christmas full time, you can best believe we'll still have the holiday style shorts coming up on the YouTube channel, so I can express my gratitude for those of you who have jumped on the Weather Center train and, Lord willing, our continued growth as we get ready for 2024. Now, as I mentioned, we are on the last 30 days of hurricane season, so we still got to talk tropics, and as you can see, we have Invest 97L honestly having a very hard time out there. This is a night and day difference between what we were initially anticipating with this storm, and National Hurricane Center's on board as well with the probabilities of formation down to a 20-40 split, 20% in the next 48 hours, 40% over the next 7 days, which is very interesting. Honestly, it's in such a favorable environment despite the shear that's still off to its east. It's getting out ahead of it now, but it unfortunately just continues to struggle and does not want to consolidate whatsoever. When you look at the satellite, you can clearly see this. The rest of the tropics, for that matter, are quiet, and truthfully, guys, as we roll through the month of November, I think it's going to stay like that, at least in the immediate future, because of what I'm seeing in our long-range ensembles. First things first, as we mentioned on this channel for several days now with 97L, you can see our track guidance is sure that at this point we're locked into a Nicaragua landfall, whatever this system looks like as we get out over the next 2 to 3 days. Our intensity guidance still suggests we could get Tropical Storm Vince out of this, but until I see otherwise on satellite and radar imagery with this, I'm not convinced we're going to be checking another name off our 2023 named list as of now. There are a couple of other authorities who suggest we could still see 2 to 3 named systems this month, but truthfully, guys, on my radar, I'm not tracking anything in the near-distant future, let alone over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and I'll show you that here momentarily. So it goes without saying, Central America, prepare for some elevated winds with this, a potential flood maker, especially for Nicaragua, Honduras, as it tracks through the Central American landmass and potentially exits into the Eastern Pacific AOR. And with them having such a favorable setup out there, there's no saying that this couldn't re-intensify once it gets out there and finally get into a named system, albeit in the Pacific side of things. Here's our true color satellite imagery. I love to fall back on this because it really paints a very vivid picture of what we're seeing out there with Invest 97L. As this loop continues to populate, there is a very broad low-level spin with it. You can pick out a clear cyclonic curvature with this storm as it continues to propagate to the west and generally west-southwest. There has been quite a bit of thunderstorm flare-up with it since overnight yesterday and sunrise this morning. I think an affiliation not only to the anticyclone directly overhead, but our old remnant low pressure that had been spinning over Jamaica for the last 72 hours. These forces have nonetheless combined and are kind of feeding off one another's levels of instability and overall relative moisture content as well, which is why we're seeing copious amounts of thunderstorm activity and probable flooding conditions for some of our islands out there, especially Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica as well, and even into portions of eastern Cuba. Now, if you look really closely, you guys can definitely pick out we have a lot of thunderstorm outflow boundaries in there as well. We had one shooting off to the northeast here just a second ago. We have lots of outflow moving in towards the core of the storm itself, even outflows pushing towards Dominican Republic, pushing towards Jamaica. I could kind of trace them out all day long if you wanted to. And what that suggests to me is this thing is just not holding on to any organization. It's not consolidating whatsoever. And it looks like if you look out over to the east quadrant of it, that area of wind shear is still trying to chase it down, which tells me our anticyclone in the upper levels we discussed yesterday, helping to kind of shield it, is also still propagating off to the west and is not allowing itself to park over top this disturbance and give it a chance to take on the name of Vince. So am I fully convinced we're going to get a tropical storm out of this? Honestly, no. I think we're definitely looking at a very prevalent rain threat for most of our Caribbean islands in Central America as it continues to the west. And do I think that's what we need to prepare for? 100%. We're still going to see some sort of a landfalling tropical entity. It just may not be nearly as serious or strong as we were alluded to last week headed into the Halloween holiday. Which overall, this is good news for everyone out there. Unfortunately, we may still have to prepare for some flooding conditions as well as some potential mudslides and landslides. I know that's kind of been a big thing for most of our Caribbean areas, just nothing but torrential rainmakers, which all in all, it could definitely be worse, especially as we get ready to hopefully close out the continued threat of any tropical entities creeping up on your neck of the woods. Now, most of the 12Z European model has come in, and as you take this through time, at least looking specifically at Invest 97L, the model really doesn't have much going on in terms of for the organization with it, maybe coming down to 1,008, 1,006 millibar low center of pressure, moving into Nicaragua before it rains itself itself out and evacuates to the eastern side of the Pacific, where it can hopefully maybe deepen down and become something and move away from any major landmass once the steering flow catches it out on that side. I also want to mention the Lesser Antilles and some of the Greater Antilles for that matter, because if you look out over the Greater Atlantic, as we get a little bit of return flow around a big area of high pressure and another subtropical ridge out there in the Atlantic, you can see another very familiar plume of moisture, very similar to what we had last time we heard about the copious amounts of rainfall and flood conditions we had, especially for our leeward windward islands, before Tammy could finally evacuate out of that region. Just that overall northward surge of equatorial moisture. Looks like we're preparing for another what looks to almost be a river of rainfall coming out of the south as that Atlantic monsoonal trough and what moisture we still have coming off of Africa tries to set itself back up over those islands, especially as we get into the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th of November. You can see a very clear channel of moist air advection going up all the way from out of the west, moving to the north and eventually the northeast, wrapping around. If you guys can see these isobars, that's indicative of an Atlantic high pressure established out there, butting up against this major polar high that's manifested itself over the southeast United States. So unfortunately, it's a battle between air masses once again, and you guys out there in the leeward windward islands are directly over top where it looks like that moisture is going to try to escape and unfortunately dump down a lot of rain as it does so. Now, as I mentioned, looking out across the tropical AOR, across the Atlantic for that matter, we're really not looking at anything forming up over the next 10 to 15 days. Some evidence in the upper level pattern suggests that we will have some of a market favorable environment for something to try to manifest itself, but as we see with 97L, it doesn't only take the environment. We also need that right amount of vorticity and low-level tropical energy to get a disturbance forming up into a named system. As you take a look at our most recent Euro ensembles, you can see very little agreement that anything's going to come out of 97L, which is a good thing. Bad thing for Central America because we are still expecting elevated winds, maybe 30, 40 mile per hour gusts in the strongest areas of thunderstorm activity associated with 97L, as well as another return for flooding conditions for at least a 12 to 18 hour period as that system drags its heels into the eastern Pacific AOR. You can also see the ensemble members for Tropical Storm Pilar out there moving away and expecting to weaken as she moves further into the East Pac AOR. And then as you scroll through the entire loop, if you look out across the Atlantic, there's nothing, guys. All the way out until the 0Z point of 16 November, there's nothing out there. So perhaps we're really getting close to reaching the final page and closing the book of hurricane season 2023. Now, echoing those sentiments, I will admit I'm a little disappointed that we didn't get a major storm out in the Caribbean. Now, hear me out before you guys think I'm trying to hype a storm or I wish bad upon the people down there or the southeast United States. Hear me out. We have all that tremendous ocean heat content and very, very hot temperatures down there still, which means even though we're moving out of the 2023 hurricane season, that water's really not going to have any ability of cycling itself through and trying to cool down from how extreme of an abnormal as we saw throughout this season. With that being said, what we're looking at here is the probabilistic ENSO forecast as we go through the winter time and then into next hurricane season. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because this would be a year's out worth of forecasting, and I'm definitely not going to try to forecast a hurricane season a year before it even gets started. But what I'm concerned about is if we do see that ocean heat content and those hot waters either stay roughly the same or possibly return to where they were this hurricane season, take a look how we're expected to drop out of an El Nino pretty rapidly as we go into 2024, and these blue lines on your bar graph here are actually what could be a forecasted La Nina setting up for our Atlantic hurricane AOR. And the reason I bring that up, guys, is because as we go through the months of November, December, and through the winter into spring, I won't be discussing it as heavily because we will be at a tropical season, but Weather Center Nazario is going to be keeping a close eye on what our ocean temperatures do and what our migratory high and low pressure centers do out there as well, because this could give us an early indication of what 2024 may look like. And all things considered, we've dodged quite a bit of bullets this hurricane season. If you go back in time, 2024, subtract 20, go back to 2004, another El Nino, La Nina style year transitioning between the two, we had a lot of major hurricanes moving through the Caribbean. And that's kind of my long-term, and I mean real long-term concern, is if we have nothing to cycle through that immense ocean heat content and keep those waters from cooling down whatsoever because we have no major low pressure area trying to feed off of that, I'm a little nervous to think of what 2024 could look like, especially as we cycle out of El Nino and open up the Caribbean source region for a very favorable environment for any kind of tropical wave or disturbance for that matter to tap into that jet fuel, if you will, of the Caribbean Sea. So just something very, very long-term to kind of jot on a sticky sticky note and put up against the calendar next year as we get ready to roll into 2024's hurricane season. We're not really going to emphasize or try to exacerbate that kind of situation this far into the future. Let's get through wintertime first and wrap up the hurricane season, shall we? Now, with that being said, we are going to start transitioning on this channel, guys. We're still going to talk a lot about Mexico, South America, and especially our folks down there in the Caribbean and Bermuda, but we are also going to start fixating on what our upper air pattern is doing over North America as we see these plumes of really, really potent polar and eventually Arctic air coming across the U.S., the lower 48, potentially making it down to the Bahamas, Cuba, the Yucatan Peninsula, and even further into the Caribbean Sea. So as you can see right now, we're still under a meridional long wave pattern. That trough is finally making its way all the way through the southeast and off the mid-Atlantic coastline, helping to bring us some wonderful weather down here in the Sunshine State. I wish it was about 24 hours earlier, because then Halloween night would have been glorious for all of us down here in Central and South Florida. We are anticipating for at least the next 24, 48 hours down here in Florida in particular to see some very, very good weather conditions before, unfortunately, we see some of that return flow come back in the humidity and our overall surface temps start to rise back up as we head into this weekend, the first weekend of November. The rest of the United States, for that matter, we do have a little bit of what looks like cross-barrier flow happening over Wyoming and the Front Range of Colorado, so maybe some elevated surface winds for that general neck of the woods. But all in all, guys, the United States is pretty quiet as we await the arrival of our next fall-winter system. You can see just off to the left-hand side of our water vapor shot all that moist air advection occurring for the Pacific Northwest, southwestern British Columbia, where once again we'll see another rise in terms of our fall and wintry precip and weather effects for the Pac Northwest before it surges across the rest of the northern tier states as we move further in time. We'll go ahead and start wrapping up this segment of Weather Center Nazario with our most recent surface analysis, and you can see that there is another little area of cold advection occurring over the Dakotas, parts of Montana, with a very weak surface low, bringing down another round of cold air fresh out of Canada. So it looks like those frigid temperatures for you guys in the northern tier, especially the upper Midwest, is likely to stick around for an extended period of time. And as you take this surface mock chart loop through time, as you get into Thursday and eventually Friday and the weekend, you see that return of high-level moisture as well as rainfall and mixed precip over the higher terrain features of Montana, Idaho, and spreading into Wyoming, probably the northern periphery of Colorado as you go through time. It is expected to amp back up for you guys in the northwest quadrant of the United States, but all in all, guys, look at how much that high pressure over the East Coast is keeping things pretty calm for the large majority of us here in the lower 48. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our 1st of November Weather Center segment. Thank you all for joining me on this wonderful afternoon. I hope everything has been great, not only for you guys here in the United States, but those of you watching and tuning in from other parts of the world. It's been a glorious time meeting and greeting all of you folks, and I hope to see you tonight at our 8 p.m. Tropics Talk, where we'll still continue to investigate a little bit of what's going on with 97L and maybe start to create some long-term theories of what 2024 might look like if we can't dispel some of those very, very hot waters still down in the Caribbean and out over the tropical Atlantic. Otherwise, guys, we'll see you again soon. This just about wraps everything up into a nice bundle. So until next time, this is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.